I like being playfully mean. It's kind of a little ticklish. It's more like they're just kind of giggling. Or you can be really torturous about it and
Mm.
where they're screaming.
Welcome back to Other People's Lives. I'm Joe Santagato.
I'm Greg Dybec.
For anyone out there that wants to be a part of the show, if you feel like you have something to share, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Go to oplshow.com or send us an email directly at oplpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, and if you want to join our Patreon, you can head over to patreon.com/OPL show. It helps support the show. You get a bunch of bonus episodes that never appear on this main channel. You get behind the scenes episodes every week to find out what topic we'll be discussing that upcoming Thursday. And 25% of all the Patreon proceeds go to a new charity each month. So you get to be part of that discussion, helping decide what we want to donate to that month. So really cool, help support the show. You could check that out at patreon.com/OPL show. And today we will be covering a topic that honestly I'm pretty shocked that we haven't talked about on the show yet, but that happens every so often. So we're going to be covering a tickle fetish, or speaking to a woman who has a tickle fetish. So we've got the guest on the line. Thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So the kind of biggest question I have to kick this off is, I guess we've all been tickled, especially kind of as children. So for you in particular, how did you begin to learn that tickling, meant, I guess, something more, whether it be sexual or just, more excitement that you got from it than probably the average person feels?
Yeah. So I was really young when I first noticed my interest in tickling, probably like 5 years old or, in kindergarten, something around then. And I feel like there's a couple distinct sort of memories or aspects that, I look back on and I was like, I could tell that I was really attracted to it, but also didn't want to be tickled by certain people or in a certain way. So for example, I had a cousin who would threaten to chase me around and tickle me. And I remember just being really freaked out by it and going to my mom and being like, he's saying he's going to tickle me, and really hating that. And then yet at the same time, a couple years later, when I started developing crushes on little boys, I have this memory of playing freeze tag on a playground with a bunch of kids from my school. And I would notice that some of the kids would try to get each other to unfreeze by tickling them. So I would purposefully freeze with my arms up in the hopes that the little boy I had a crush on would tickle me. So even at that young age, when I didn't know what sex was, I still was I want people I like to tickle me, but I don't want people I don't like and or relatives to tickle me. So I still was kind of making those connections.
Got it. So when you get a little, when you get a little older, when did you start to realize exactly what was going on? Because when you're a kid, I know you're kind of experimenting and, you like certain things, but you don't really know what's going on. You don't know that what arousal or sex is or, anything like that. So at what point did you kind of start to realize oh, this is actually something that is arousing to me?
Yeah, that's a good question. And, we can talk more about sort of the things that I was interested when I was a child, and sort of my interest in those, and then sort of when it tipped over in my early teens of oh, this is a sexual thing and I'm into this. But I would say basically around the age I had access to the internet is when it all was okay, this is a thing called a fetish. This is sexual. I understand now what sex is. And so, I would say probably around age 12 or 13 was kind of when I remember writing in a diary, confessing to the diary, I think I like tickling, or, so I can't remember how I phrased it. But yeah, searching on the internet for just tickling or tickling and sex, and finding these websites where, there were images of people being tickled and, being really interested in that. But the fact of the matter is, I mean, I had been masturbating and thinking about tickling since like the very beginning. So when I was really young, which is interesting because again, I didn't really, when you're that young, all you know is this feels good when I touch myself. And also, I like to think about this particular thing. And it isn't until years later I was like, oh, that's what I've been doing all those years. So yeah. So I mean, I would say like, like a lot of fetishists, I think even on your show, like some people talk about it being like super, super, super young. Like it was a fetish, a sexual fetish from the very beginning, even though I myself was pre-sexual at that time. And then once I learned what sex was and all that stuff, then I started making the connection like, oh, okay, this is a sexual thing for me, not just simply it feels good to think about.
Right. And is that sort of something that you chose to explore right away as you kind of explained transitioning into your teenage years, now really understanding the kind of relation of tickling to sexual arousal? Did you pursue it like kind of in partners, or was it something that almost suppressed a little bit before kind of discovering it or acting it out?
I didn't explore it with partners until I was 25 years old, but I was also a late bloomer sexually. I didn't have my first kiss or my first sexual partner until I was 21 years old, or like 20 going on 21, something like around there. And in college. And then, it took me a couple years to kind of get started. I was really shy around boys and, kind of had this love-hate relationship with boys when I was in my teens and like in high school. So the only exploration I was doing sexually and tickling wise was just with myself and with basically internet exploration, fantasies, that kind of thing, writing stories, that sort of thing. And yeah, I think I was 25. I had a pretty serious boyfriend at the time. And I told him, I'm into this thing. And he was like, he let me tickle him. I don't think he was super into it, but he wanted to please me. And he had a bit of a submissive streak. So so he let me explore in that regard. And then from then on, every sexual partner, almost every sexual partner I've had, or every romantic partner I've had, I've told at that point.
So how exactly do you sort of go about this tickling thing? Is it more of like a foreplay thing, or is it something that actually brings you to orgasm?
I would say I use it more as a foreplay thing. When I have sex, I need to be like thinking about it to have an orgasm, basically. Like it needs to be in my fantasies or in my thoughts to actually push me over the edge. But actually the irony would be that, if I had a partner who was like, I don't know, going down on me or something and I was about to orgasm, I'm pretty sure if they tickled me, I would not, like, it would be too much of a distraction and I wouldn't know. So it's kind of ironic in that way. But yeah, I would say that, the way I do it, and of course, like everybody in the, who are into tickling, it's very different. But I prefer to sort of use it as more of a way to get turned on, and then also have regular sex. But at the same time, it's like, you could, I mean, there's no order things have to go in. You could have regular sex and then tickle somebody. So yeah, I guess that's kind of how it is for me. For me, it's more, to be honest, a lot of it is very internal. It's very sort of in my head. But I do get excited and happy when I get to actually explore it with another person.
And you also mentioned that you were tickling your partner at the time. Is that also part of it, or do you only like when people tickle you?
So I'm a switch. I like both. But I would definitely say, if I had to pick, I would prefer to top or do the tickling. Actually, the way they phrase it in the tickling community is if you're a lee or a lure, right? So a tickle lee or a tickle lure. So I would say that I'm more of a lure. That's my preference. The one thing that's interesting about this kink is that, of course, I'm sure you're not surprised, a lot of people hate being tickled. So there's been a number of, guys I've dated where, I'll mention it and they'll just be like, I hate being tickled. Like, don't do that. And of course I won't do that because that's, that would be non-consensual. and it's a little bit of a bummer. But on the other hand, most people aren't against, like, if you say, oh, well, will you tickle me? Like, most people don't have a problem with that. So it's kind of nice because I can tap into it if I want to in a more submissive way. But ideally, if I had my druthers, it would be me doing the tickling.
Okay. I love that. Lee and lur. I love learning terms like that. That's so cool. So what is it then for you specifically, I guess, about the act of tickling? Because we've all been tickled or have tickled, I assume. But, what is it for you that's such a turn on specifically?
Oh man. I mean, I think like loss of control is a big part of it. I really also like bondage a lot. And so, especially if I'm, just fantasizing just on my own, looking at like porn or stories or whatever, I strongly prefer there to be like a really strict bondage element where like a person cannot move. And so I kind of like that idea of kind of going crazy while being restrained, or like wanting to protect yourself and not being able to. And then I'm trying to think like, I'm not really into like humiliation or degradation, but I do kind of like being, the way I term it is I like being playfully mean to partners. And I feel like this is a really good sort of like activity to do that you can like ramp it up or ramp it down, right? So you can be very teasing about it where the other person like it's kind of a little ticklish. It's more like they're just kind of giggling, or you can be really torturous about it and like where they're screaming. And of course, all of that must be negotiated ahead of time. But I kind of like that sort of like role of sort of the mean, like slightly bitchy dominatrix who's like, oh, you can't get away, can you? Like, what? But you're smiling, you're laughing, you must like this, right? Like that kind of thing. So I think I really, really enjoy like tapping into that role.
Yeah, I can see how that's, just a fun form of play in general for a lot of people, even if it doesn't necessarily have kind of the fetish aspect. And, people do have such a strong reaction to tickling. And it kind of reminds me, Joe, I remember we kind of made the connection when we were talking to someone with a sneeze fetish about the act of sneezing and how physical that is. And tickling specifically is, someone, like you said, losing all control. It's kind of this full body action if the person, truly is ticklish. And it's honestly kind of like one of the most physical things or reactions that I can think of, to be honest.
Yeah. It's actually really interesting because I think in a way, because obviously when we talk about BDSM, a lot of people think about pain, right? Like think about like being whipped or flogged. But I actually think like people can control their reactions to pain better than tickling. Like you can really get stoic and stuff. But with tickling, it's like if you're ticklish, you really can't control yourself. And it's, yeah, so I think that's kind of the fun of it, is this sort of like inducing this reaction in somebody that they can't control. Yeah, definitely.
Is there a specific spot that you enjoy being tickled, or that you enjoy like tickling other people?
Yes. I'm really into armpits and under the arms. That's my favorite one. In the tickling community, like feet are obviously huge. No surprise there. There's a lot of crossover with like foot fetishism, which makes total sense. And I'm not like against feet, but I'm not particularly into feet either. For some reason, I do kind of trace this back. Like I can definitely remember reading stories where like, it specifically described like a person tied up with their arms over their head, and like trying to put their arms down but couldn't. And I both like to tickle that part of the body, but that is my preferred spot to be tickled on. And what's interesting about it is that that's actually not my most ticklish spot. I'm not really sure what is. I would say like maybe inner thighs or feet might be my most ticklish spot. But what's interesting about it is that when I'm being tickled, I almost like I want it to get this balance where I experience the ticklish sensation, but it's not so intense that I can still process it. Like if someone's tickling me in a really ticklish spot, I can't even, my brain just shuts down. And it's like, I'm just like, get away, get away, get away. Whereas if it's not that ticklish, I can kind of sit there and like be like, I'm tied up, I can't move, this person is making me helpless. And that's kind of, I can actually like sort of really just sink into the fantasy without my brain just completely shutting down and going wild. So yeah, so I think that might have something to do with it, where it is definitely ticklish, but it's more, I don't know, it like more taps into the psychological side of things.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because you mentioned that a few times of just how sort of you need to just be able to be thinking about it clearly, where maybe the tickle itself won't necessarily bring you to orgasm, but just knowing, what's going on or thinking about it. So, for example, like I guess before you were able to explore this with partners and you were talking about just kind of coming to terms with it, understanding it yourself, is like self-tickling a thing? Is that almost like a form of masturbation, or was it more so just mentally thinking about like the act of tickling or being tied up and getting tickled?
Yeah, well, of course, like, there's the thing about you can't tickle yourself, which is not true. You absolutely can tickle yourself. But it is much harder. Like I really can't tickle myself on the spots that I'm less sensitive. I can't really do it, but on my more sensitive spots, I could if I wanted to. And I would say that like, I don't really think I ever experimented much with that. And I can't really speak to the whole community, like if other people have experienced that. I'm sure people have. I think it's really, for me, very mental, more thinking about it. But I definitely remember as a kid, like experimenting with self bondage a little bit, like, like sitting there with your arms above your head or tying up like just your feet or something. So I definitely, really like that feeling of restraint. And I definitely experimented with that, when I was kind of experimenting as a teen. But yeah, like I never really, I would sometimes like try to tickle myself and it would be too ticklish and I'd be like, I can't, and that's kind of the ironic thing about it is like, I mean, you kind of need a partner to put you in that helpless.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, it's hard to push yourself. Like it's almost like working out with a trainer versus working out with yourself or something. It's like to keep tickling yourself or get you to that point where it's like almost like uncontrollable. It would just be really hard to like induce that feeling by yourself, I guess. And then for the bondage aspect with tickling, how would you approach that with a partner? Like if you're in bondage, kind of getting uncontrollably tickled, is it sort of just like with BDSM, like would you set a safe word, or like how does the partner kind of know, what you like or how much you can handle?
Yeah, I mean, I generally would, with a new partner, discuss safe words beforehand. And it's one of those things where I don't think I've ever like, with a partner, like said a safe word or had them say one. It usually just gets to a point where they're like, okay, that's enough. And I'm like, okay, I'll stop, or whatever. Or, yeah, like, I don't know. I mean, like in my experiences, it's been just, you can kind of read your partner's signals and like kind of understand when they're done. I also like another thing that is good to pay attention to is like if a person starts coughing, like that's usually a sign they need to take a breath. And so, because obviously if you're laughing hysterically, it's, yeah, you're going to be, you got to be careful because like you could start hyperventilating or, just, I haven't been in any situations where someone's like passed out or anything like that.
It is almost scary what you can do to someone that you're tickling. Like how uncontrollable it is.
I'm also curious, like you were saying, like how you're mentioning this, like, how long typically does the tickling kind of go on? Because for me, like I'm like super ticklish. So for me, like 3 seconds, I'm like, I need to get out of here. Like, stop it. So like how often does it go on? Is it something that kind of lasts like a few minutes? Like, the kind of foreplay is usually, a pretty extended period of time, like more than a tickle session it would be, I imagine. But how long does it usually go?
Well, keep in mind that like if you tie someone to tickle them, you can do it in 3-second increments. You could like tickle them for 3 seconds, let them rest. So it can kind of go as long as you want. I will say I've only had a couple partners who have like, okay, if we're talking about me as a top, I've only had a few partners who had the fetish themselves. versus partners who had different kinks but were willing to let me tickle them. And with the partners who have had the kink itself, usually the sessions are much longer, 45 minutes, an hour. And of course, it's not like continuous tickling. It's more like, you tie them up and then you start gently and you like explore all the different parts of their body. And then I have a big thing for implements. So like hairbrushes, feathers, toothbrushes, all that kind of stuff. So exploring using different tools on different parts of the body. And yeah, like if you're with someone who wants to be tickled, they're probably going to be like cool with it for much longer than someone who doesn't like to be tickled. And again, like if I'm in the submissive role, it's kind of the same thing. Like, I think like if I had my druthers, it would be a longer session, but it would be more like exploratory. Like someone would have like a whole bunch of different, implements that they could use on me and discover like which spot is most sensitive and then go back to that spot and like tease me about that and do all that kind of stuff. And as long as like they're stopping to like let me catch my breath, I probably could do that for a while. Before, eventually what can happen, I've seen this happen, is you can stop being ticklish at a certain point. I played with a guy once who had a tickle fetish and I was really going like nuts on his feet. And at a certain point he stopped laughing and he was like, I can't feel it anymore. And like, it's like his body just was like, nope, we're done, shutting down.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really weird. And I think like to a certain extent, I have maybe experienced that before, like where you kind of, your body almost gets used to it and is like, oh, okay, this really isn't a threat anymore. And then it's just like, so yeah.
So I feel like I have to bring this up because so many people were kind of introduced to the tickle fetish world through the documentary Tickled, which kind of gives it a bad rap, I think, or correct me if I'm wrong if you know the exact plot, but I think it was kind of, he was luring people in through tickle videos and publishing them without them knowing or something like that. But I assume that, or from what I've heard, it kind of created a lot of, maybe misconceptions around this community. Is that something you're kind of familiar with?
Yeah, like I definitely, of course, watched that movie immediately when it came out. And what's ironic is I remember the bad guy, David D'Amato, who has now passed away. He had the pseudonym Terry Tickle, and I remember seeing her websites when I was like a teenager and being like, oh yeah, this Terry Tickle's got some good stuff here, so it's just so weird to think like, oh, that was that guy and he was like manipulating these people. Yeah, one thing I do appreciate about the movie is that he also, the guy who directs the movie, Farrier, he also interviews this guy named Robert Ivy, I think his name is, who is the creator of My Friend's Feet, which is like a gay tickle site. And Robert, I hope I'm getting his name right, Robert Ivy, he he's pretty much like out and proud. He's probably making a decent amount of money on his websites and stuff. And he's an example of somebody who's doing it above board. Like everybody knows what they're getting into, there's safe words. And so I'm glad that the director showed like, hey, all the people into tickling aren't all like manipulative sociopaths. Like there's people who are, creating this content, but like it's all consensual. People get paid for it versus, David D'Amato, who used pseudonyms and other people to carry out his work and then manipulated those people into like basically being silent or like not trying to like take them to court and stuff. So I'm hoping that anybody who watches that isn't going to be like, anyone who's into tickling is exactly like this one bad guy, and it's more like, oh, there was this bad guy who, did bad things essentially.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm just curious, just because, you're just so articulate about all of this and, clearly something that you enjoy, something that you understand, something that you've explored, which is just always just awesome to hear, from anyone, especially when we speak to guests like yourself. And is this something that you're open about with other people or just specific partners? Or do you kind of just keep it to yourself for the most part?
I would say that other than like sexual partners, I generally keep it to myself. Okay, like so like there's my sexual partners and my romantic partners, and then there's like my friends, and then there's like my family. And obviously like my family knows the least because I don't really want to sit down and have a conversation with my parents about kink. But at the same time, when I was in college, I did a big senior paper on BDSM, and like I remember like talking to them about it, and my dad kind of being like, oh, people like that are screwed up or whatever. And so I kind of was like, okay, well, I'll just not bring that up again because I am one of those people. But with friends, they know like they know that I'm quote unquote kinky, like, but they don't necessarily know specifics, right? um so I kind of let them think whatever they want to think about that, and they probably are like, she's into bondage and leather and stuff, and some of that's true and some of it's not. And unless they ask me, if they were to say like, tell me more about that, I'm interested, I would be happy to share with friends.
Mhm.
But I don't feel the need to be like, well, specifically I'm into this and yada yada, because it's like, well, I don't really expect my friends, other than perhaps like my best friend who does know about the tickling, and like who, being besties, we like share a lot about our sex lives with each other. But with more vanilla friends, I don't expect to hear like, hey, I fucked my husband last night in this position. So
Yeah.
I'm not going to say I fucked my boyfriend in this position and I tickled him too. And I will say though, I do have friends who are kinky, and I would say that those friends do know, because when you are kinky, even if you're not sharing the same fetish, you kind of speak the same language, and like you're not gonna probably judge each other. Um,
Right.
so it's not like I would say, oh, I'm into this, and they, would respond like, that's really stupid, or, whatever. They would probably be like, oh yeah, I've heard about that. So yeah, it just depends on the person. But I'm not posting about it on social media or, or anything like that.
Totally. Yeah, no.
We usually ask, our guests this, but do you think that this would need to be a constant in your life? Like, do you think that you could potentially marry somebody who wasn't into this at all?
I think I could. I've had partners who are not into tickling specifically, and like it's been perfectly fine. I would say though, however, I couldn't marry somebody who wasn't like kinky themselves or sex positive, or at least like heading in that direction and open to that. I would not marry somebody who was like, don't want to do no tickling, no bondage, no spanking, just whatever, missionary style sex on Thursdays under the covers. Like to me, that would be sexual incompatibility.
Right.
But, my current partner, it has like a kink himself, and, I indulge him in his kink. He indulges me in my kink. And I think it works pretty good. We have good chemistry, and previous partners, same thing. Like if we had good chemistry and we were open-minded, the sex could work. And if we didn't have chemistry and one or the other of us was not open-minded, then it didn't work. So I think in terms of it being a constant, it will be a constant in the sense of like, I will have this interest until I'm dead, and I will always be thinking about it, during sex and all that kind of stuff. But I think that like certain aspects could be negotiated with the right person.
Right. And that's a cool way to approach it. Like you said, sexual compatibility more so, not necessarily the same exact kink, but just that open-mindedness. And I do want to ask, is there, as you kind of continue to explore this, is there sort of a specific tickle fantasy that you haven't experienced yet that you would want to?
Ooh, that's a good question. Like my fantasies like that I've acted out are very basic. It's like tie someone up, tickle them, the end. And I've done that, and I mean, for me, I think it would be more like maybe location or like role play. Like I definitely, I'm definitely into the whole like dungeon vibe, like torture chamber type thing. Also, I'm kind of into the medical stuff, like not necessarily medical play like in BDSM, but like the whole kind of like, I don't know, aesthetic, I guess you could say. Well, like I think it would be more like, oh, let's do this and pretend that it's like you're in a torture chamber and I'm torturing you for information, or you're the nurse and I'm the patient and you've strapped me down for a full body, like examination. I think that would be more sort of in the realm of what would interest me. Because like the very basics of like tie someone up and tickle them, I've done that. And it's not like, oh, well, fantasy fulfilled, I never want to do it again. I probably will never get sick of it. But it's not a particularly difficult fantasy to realize if you have, a willing partner. Mm-hmm. So I think it would be more just like little bells and whistles.
Nice. Yeah, totally. And, I think just to wrap this up, we just love getting guests on like you who, are experiencing this, so sex positive, able to explain their kink. I just think no matter what, every time we put out an episode like this, there's someone listening that it helps, just because they're starting to kind of explore their own kink and, kind of figure whatever it may be out about themselves or a partner even. So is there anything that you would say to, someone listening who might want to get into either this fetish specifically or really just anything, I guess, just kind of any advice on, how to start out that kind of journey and exploration for themselves?
Oh gosh, that's such a big question. Yeah, because there's like so many things to talk about, like in terms of like safety and this and that and how to meet people and blah blah blah. I would say there was this guy is a little bit problematic. I always preface this by saying that, but I've taken a lot of Dan Savage's advice to heart over the years. I've read Savage Love for years. And he had some comment once where he said that you should treat your own kinks like they're Christmas presents that your partner gets to open, not like, oh, here's this shitty thing about me, sorry, but rather like, here's a gift to you that's very exciting and we get to explore it together. And I would say that, yeah, like if a person is inclined towards something sexual that is a little bit outside of the norm, instead of coming to a partner and saying like, oh my God, I have this horrible confession to make, I hope you don't hate me. Instead being like, hey, I've always had this interest in whatever. And like, would you be, you can say no, but would you be interested? More of an intriguing, positive thing and less of a self-deprecating, I'm screwed up kind of thing. Because there's a lot of kinky people out there. And, chances are if you look hard enough, you'll find somebody who, if they're not into what you're into, they're at least open-minded and interested in exploring. And I also think that like, if you're attracted to somebody, even something that you might have thought in the past, like, oh, I'd never be interested in this, all of a sudden becomes sexy because the person you're with is sexy. So.
Yeah, that is a really like cool way of thinking about it, because I do think there's a lot of stigmas around people who have kinks or fetishes or, things of that nature. But it is a very interesting kind of perspective to be like, think of them as like gifts that you get to show someone and explore and go down, this kind of road. But yeah, we appreciate you coming on and sharing, everything about this. It's very interesting. And also, I feel like we ended on a perfect note there where you were kind of shifted the perspective of kinks and fetishes.
And I could easily talk about it for 45 minutes more. So, yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it and, kind of share about maybe what's maybe a slightly lesser known fetish.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So how do you feel about tickling?
I think she was awesome because she just made it so much bigger than tickling, but
she did. I mean, the way that she spoke about it was like, I feel like I was speaking to a like a sex teacher.
Yeah, sort of. No, definitely.
You know what I mean? Like I was getting like the lowdown of like all of it, not just like the tickling, obviously, but just like the mentality and the the thought process behind it. It makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think tickling specifically, it interests me because it is, one of those, it kind of falls in that category of kinks where we've kind of all experienced it to some degree, just not in a sexual way necessarily. So it's like, it's always cool to me when we know the feeling, of what this thing is, but now you're understanding that this feeling means so much more to someone else, or the way they're just kind of perceiving it in their mind, or the sexual arousal that comes with it is just so different for this thing that, physically we do know what it feels like. And I mean, I'm fairly indifferent to tickling. I don't think I'm super ticklish. It's fun to tickle people. Like I don't like go around tickling strangers, but like I feel like in relationships and stuff, like, you can jokingly tickle. I don't go out of my way, but it's, I feel like you've never tickled someone?
No, I mean, I've tickled people, obviously. I mean, it's not something that I like actively do to flirt or, definitely not something that I think would like arouse somebody unless they asked me to.
Yeah. No.
But I don't know. I don't like getting tickled at all. I hate it.
You strike me as that person. I don't think I do either.
It's ticklish. It's just not a good feeling. Like I'm like, I don't know. It's like a nerve thing, I guess. I don't know, but it's very interesting. And also it made a lot of sense what she was saying with like the bondage sort of bridge there that kind of like bridges these things together, is like the bondage and the tickling or whatever.
It's like a non-violent violence in a way. That's a weird way to put it, but like it's
a playful domination.
Totally. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's very dominant.
I feel like I've seen some like BDSM videos where like someone's like strapped up and there's like a feather. I was going to ask her about the feather, but then she like had
different toys and yeah.
She said toothbrush and I went, what? Like that one I didn't understand. Like, yeah, that's a weird one. But the feather I feel like is a popular one of like tickling, but I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I think it's probably fairly common compared to some of the things we've spoken about recently, which include things like poop and clowns and sneezes. So we've definitely gotten a handful of emails too, about tickling, but just really cool. And like we were saying, it's just I just think no matter what the kink is, no matter what the fetish is, to speak with someone like her who has just been able to open communication, like open lines of communication so well to partners and to herself too, because I think that's a big part of it, is a lot of people not necessarily being honest with themselves or suppressing it, or like she said at the end, approaching this as this is something wrong with me, this is something obscure, this makes me different, versus this makes me special, this is something that's fun to explore, and I'm, like she said, gonna present this to you like a gift almost. And I think that's a really cool way to just kind of tie this all in, and just like, I guess as a sort of universal message for so many of the kinks and fetishes that we've spoken about on this show. And that was, a great kind of perspective to add to the bunch.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, awesome. For anyone out there who wants to be a part of the show, like I said in the beginning, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can go to our website, oplshow.com, or just send us an email, oplpodcast@gmail.com. We're going to go through all of them and set something up. But
follow us on Instagram @OPL Podcast. If you want to become a patron to support the show, get a bunch of bonus episodes, go to patreon.com/OPL Show. Leave a rating and review on iTunes if you're listening, or subscribe, comment, let us know how you feel about the episode.
Yep, that is all. See you guys next time.